Hello, welcome to the AppleInsider podcast. I'm William Gallagher. Our sponsors this week are Fast Growing Trees and Rogue Amoeba. More about them later. And I am joined by a cold, really. I promise not to cough at you. Or indeed, actually, at Wes Hilliard, who, I presume for this very reason, is staying thousands of miles away from me and is consequently, hopefully, very, very well. Wes, all fine, no colds, no illnesses, you're good, right?
I'm mostly here. I won't get into it, but it's been a fun health week for me as well. But hey, at least I can podcast.
Okay, right, don't press. But the thing I know you've actually got is the topic for this week's AppleInsider Plus. I should say that's the ad-free and extended version of the show, which today is going to turn out to be even more topical than I think you expected. So Wes, what's AppleInsider Plus this time?
Well, I brought it up because there's a topic on Apple ads later, but I wanted to discuss how we deal with ads. Do we care? Is it something that we bother with? Do we have services with ads? Do we pay the highest dollar to get rid of ads? Like, how do we deal with all of this? So just something we're going to talk about in the after show, and maybe it'll be on topic a little bit more than we thought because of what's happening today.
Which we should get into. First, let me explain. If you are already a subscriber, well, you'll hear all about all this at the end. But if you're not, it would be so good to have you join us. And you can become an AppleInsider Plus subscriber through Patreon or through Apple Podcast subscriptions. You'll always find details for all of that in the show notes. Now, like I say, AppleInsider Plus, unexpectedly extra topical, and that is, because as Wes says, just before we started recording, Google got, well, really some bad news about its advertising arm. A US district judge has ruled that Google effectively has an unlawful monopoly over certain online advertising markets. And there's a lot in here. And as we record this, it's still breaking with more details. But the short version is that this particular ruling actually makes it more likely that Google will be broken up. Wes, what do you know about this?
Actually, the Google thing is about their ads business and whether or not they have a monopoly on ads, which, I mean, look around. It feels kind of that way. Looks like they've ruled that Google is, in fact, has an illegal monopoly on online advertising. Now, what does that mean? Who knows? Now they got to go in and figure out exactly what they're going to do, how they want to affect Google and its business, but this is a big deal.
You would think this is one of those cases where it's possible that you think of Google's monopoly the way Apple is often called a monopoly, but Apple sells like 50% of smartphones in the world. Thinks it literally isn't a monopoly. Is this a fair summary of Google's strength?
Well, it seems to be because, I mean, everywhere on the internet is Google Ads. They have the ad spaces. Basically, it would be as if Google owned every billboard in America and then charged people to put things on those billboards. Right. They're pretty ubiquitous. There are ads owned by other companies. Amazon has an ad business. Apple's ad business in particular pertains to its App Store and Apple News and the segments of its operating system that it owns that Google cannot touch. But outside of that, yeah, it's just Google. And I think they've even done things, allegedly, that let them stay on top and ensure no one else could step into this space. It's all Google.
We should say for completeness that apparently, according to the ruling, there's one thing. Google was accused of monopolizing advertiser ad networks, and that particular accusation, despite the Department of Justice being fully behind it, that has in some way failed. And I don't fully understand the differences there, but it's not like a blanket thing for this. It's just close enough to it that it makes it likely a breakup will happen. A thing I've learned actually just now from Mark Miller at AppleInsider is that Google itself looked at breaking away, not breaking up, but hiving off its advertising thing years and years ago. Why would it do that?
For this reason exactly. They don't want the scrutiny. And if it's just this little old ad business, this mom and pop run thing that is not owned, that is not under the Google umbrella, maybe they would get left alone. But of course, that would never work. It's still going to be an Alphabet run company. I don't know. They were probably trying to be sneaky about it, but having to relinquish it to a completely, different third party would be interesting. I wonder how that would affect it. Because realistically, I think Am I wrong to say that most of Google's money is because of advertising, at least up till a recent point?
Search is monetized by advertising, so presumably, yes.
So I wonder how this affects their underlying business. If they, if they're monopolizing search ads, if they're monopolizing ads around the internet, what does it mean that their ad business has to now be separated from them, right? Does that make them a much smaller company? Does it change how they do business? I don't know.
I was thinking when I learnt this thing about that they had looked at it before, that this must mean it's actually quite possible to do, that something in the structure means it's easy to hive off. But yeah, the thought of what they're left with for it. I wonder if Google will become more interesting and innovative again and bring back the, I was thinking it used to give its staff, was it a 10% time to work on anything you liked? And that went years ago. Maybe they'd bring that back. I realise I'm reaching there a little bit, but it'd be nice to think something good would come out of this.
So I wonder if this means Google will have to be its own customer. Basically, it's now going to have to live in a world where the monopolized ad platforms are now part of its business structure, and then it's going to also be cursing the way that it all works and trying to find ways to monetize itself without going through terrible ad business structure. I think that would be quite funny.
When I used to work at BBC Worldwide, there was this big team selling ads directly, and any slot they couldn't sell, they hired in what they called an ad network who would put it out for bids and sell it. And it would always come in at a lower amount, but it filled up a slot that otherwise wouldn't have got anything. So I can well see Google having its own ad team, even though it also has to buy ads through other ways. It's complicated, and at this moment it's probably getting more complicated. I don't know whether to be concerned for Google or not, but I do notice I'm using it less and less anyway. Maybe this is actually part of a big sea change away from Google.
A lot of people just default to Google because it's a name. It's something they know and understand. But its structure has changed. Yeah. It relies heavily on AI results. People are getting tired of it. And I've seen more and more people just popping up social media in real life talk about how they want to get away from Google. And they're discovering that things like DuckDuckGo exists. And it's a slow and steady transition. They will always be a giant, at least in recent times. I don't think anyone's going to be able to step in and just take over Google search or anything. I think the ad stuff moving away is an important step in making this internet a little bit more livable, because Google has basically dictated how the internet works for the last decade or so. And that's a little scary because websites like ours are totally dependent on whether or not Google is going to show us in search results. And that's crazy.
Realize, of course, Google also owns YouTube, and YouTube, the whole business works on advertising there. This is ridiculous to say, but even broader than I was thinking a moment ago. But okay, we'll find out more about Google as things develop, and there are going to be further, doubtless there's going to be an appeal or something like that, so this could go on for a while. But in the meantime, the reason you were originally going to suggest AppleInsider Plus be about advertising was the massive news that Apple's changed the name of its advertising business, now calling it Apple Ads. I can't even remember what it was called before. Apple Adverts.
It was Apple search ads. It was more specific.
Oh, right.
So now it's just Apple Ads.
That suggests that they're planning, or if they haven't already, to expand advertising a lot.
Well,
is that a reasonable fear?
Apple even said it. They already have gone beyond search ads. It's ads in Apple News and other places. So it makes sense to change the name. This wasn't a change in strategy. It was just a name change. They're going to continue offering the same products they did before. Ads in the Today search in the App Store, search ads in the App Store, and Apple News, stuff like that. We can't go and have them place ads on our website, for example. Like, that's not what they're doing.
Right. Presumably we could place ads on theirs.
Yes.
We could all get together, all the listeners of the AppleInsider podcast, and we could advertise bananas on the Apple website. We could do anything like that. You're just looking at me now.
Well, so a lot of people, for some reason, classify Apple's services, I guess what you'd call advertisements, as advertisements. They're really just kind of flags, right? You see them in the settings app sometimes. You see them as notifications. And people I've seen repeatedly go on social media to complain, Apple just told me about this 3-month deal for Apple Music. How dare they? And it's just like, but okay, you know that Apple Music exists and you've chosen not to use it. But if you were a user who had no idea, how is Apple supposed to let you know that Apple Music not only exists, but there is a deal right now? I think it's, within their right on the platform to not pester. It shouldn't be a permanent ad at the top of the screen that doesn't go away until you give them money. But, people classify those things as ads, and I just don't see it that way.
I think I'm more bothered by them. I find them more persistent. I mean, I haven't seen one in a while, but I've been aware and annoyed by them in the past. But yeah, I'm not anti-advertising at all, and not just because AppleInsider, like every website, depends on it. I studied marketing at one point, and the problem of letting people know about your thing. Marketing is getting a thing you have to the people who would like it. Advertising is just trying to sell it to everybody. So I'm all for being alerted to things I didn't know about before. And you're right, I can't see another way that Apple could do it. So Apple ads, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested. This is something I've gotten into before on the show. Apple's in a unique position where they could probably do this in a way that no one else is doing. And actually, so I don't think what Google and Facebook and Amazon do is necessary. They don't need all of the world's information to show you an ad about toothpaste. Billboards have always worked. You're driving to work, you see a billboard for toothpaste, you're now aware of toothpaste. Great. That's fine. And I think Apple would take a similar approach, just like how they do with Apple Intelligence. They're not training on your data, unlike Google and others who use every prompt and query to train its main model. So I think Apple could be a unique entry into the advertising space, and I would be interested in seeing how they handle it.
I think one thing that interested me is I think I'm more aware of Apple ads than I used to be, but it actually started in 2016 as like you said, Apple search ads. So the fact that we've gone 9 years before I noticed means it's probably not that invasive. What am I talking about?
Well, I was just going to say I have seen people complain that certain apps they don't like are advertised on the App Store, right? They'll go to the Today View and it'll be like, download this app that you disagree with. And they're like, why am I seeing this? It's like, well, they paid money to Apple and they put the ad up. I mean, they allowed the app in the App Store. Why wouldn't they allow them to give them money for the ad spot? I agree that some of them are maybe not that great or tasteful, but at the same time, you can't really, you can't pick and choose, especially if you're an advertising company. Like Apple chose this. And so I think that just like with any other expansion into other things you don't do, like TV shows with, cursing and nudity, that wasn't something we thought Apple was going to do 15 years ago. And here we are. But if you enter the advertising business, sometimes you're going to get some stuff that is outside of your comfort zone. And you're going to see an ad for something that maybe not everyone's going to agree with. But when you're the ad company putting up an ad spot, maybe there is some discretion, but again, you're also the App Store owner, and you allowed the app on the App Store in the first place, so why wouldn't you allow there to be an ad? It's kind of convoluted.
Yeah. Well, quite. It's I've never seen one of these, so I'm not sure of an example of it, but if an app has been approved on the App Store, I can't see a reason for it. I mean, I get lots of sports apps advertised to me from time to time, and I'll never look at any of them.
Gambling, certain social media websites that people don't like, stuff like that, just maybe a news resource that they don't like, right? That people see controversy in a lot of things, but they just think, oh, well, Apple shouldn't be doing this. Just like they, it's a similar vein of Apple shouldn't be advertising on X, right? We've had discussions about this before, but it's one of those things of if they feel that they can get a return on it, what's stopping them from doing it? maybe moral grounds. People can argue moral grounds all day long, but finances sometimes trump morals. It depends. It just gets down to a lot of weird stuff. But Apple's a big company, and each branch, it's not a a single entity. Apple is many, many different people with many different ideas, and I think we need to understand that because they're not a monolith. They're not making decisions perfectly unilaterally across every board, right? Just because the iPhone thinks a certain way doesn't mean that the Apple TV division is going to think a certain way, right? So,
I'm glad you put it like that because away from technology even, I'm involved in all sorts of charities here in the UK, and I think every one of them is having discussions about whether they should still be on Twitter or not. And there are actually strong reasons for and against. The reach, the connection with people, how people find out about you at all, but engagement's going down. There's all sorts of things going on. I thought it was an easy decision for some of them, and it turns out to be. Of course, the more you look into the details, the more it isn't, and there are strong opinions on all sides.
With any social media platform, as we discussed before, it's a discussion of, is it worth leaving behind the existing audience and hoping that they follow? Or is it that your audience is already drained and there's nothing left, and that the new platform has your audience, right? So if you're still, like, say you're a public service, this is a problem that's been faced with X recently. And we won't get into why people are leaving X. I think everyone knows, but public services, right? Like, say it's your city has put out, there's a pothole in this road, don't go here, and they've used X to put those messages out in the past. Do they leave the platform because of these moral standpoints, or if they have 200 followers and that's everyone that lives in their town, can they leave the platform? And it gets a little complicated. Can they tell these 200 people, we're leaving, you should come with us, come to this new platform? It's complicated. Apple's is less complicated, but I think that, money drives all, and if they are getting something out of the advertising on X, then obviously if they feel like they're able to do it without being, like, the reason why they left in the first place was because their ads were showing up next to questionable content. Maybe now there's some algorithm making sure it never happens that way. While there is questionable content on the platform, maybe Apple ads aren't showing up next to it as much. So maybe they've reached some sort of agreement on that. We don't know. We're not the ones making these decisions, but yeah.
I'll tell you what, let's step away from this into something. I cannot decide if this is nice or not. This week, the last ever Intel Mac Mini was officially moved to the category of vintage by Apple, which means it's a little harder to get servicing, but also it's on the way to obsolete when it's impossible to get servicing or repairs, or at least through Apple. Listen, I wrote an article about kind of like a eulogy for the 2018 Intel Mac Mini, and on it I talked about the fact that, for very good reason, there are people who were enormous fans of it back then and still are today, and so this will be a missed Mac. As well as being the end of an Intel era, there are still other Intel Macs, but a big one is gone now. This is one of those machines that people miss when it's gone, and I know that's true. And Mike Worthley on AppleInsider, for example, is very much a fan of this, but it turns out I'm not. The 2018 Mac Mini is the one I bought with far too little storage. And so after about 6 months or so, I just could never. It was like getting a bucket trying to empty the storage every couple of hours to try to get something done for it. So I was glad to see the back of my 2018 Mac Mini, but I realise I'm in a minority of probably just about one there. But I also realise, since you are the iPad and Apple Vision Pro guy, you're thinking, Mac Mini, I've heard of that one. Mm-hmm. Or are you a secret fan?
I've had a couple of Mac Minis. I actually had the 2018 Intel Mac Mini. It's currently at my sister's house, I think. I'm not even sure if it's in use. Good question. And I have the M4 Mac Mini, so that's what we're recording on right now. But this is interesting for a different reason. I'm looking at the compatibility list for macOS Sequoia. Do you think that this is the last year we're going to have compatibility with Intel Macs for macOS?
Whoa, well, this year marks 5 years since Apple Silicon. I just
Well,
kind of registered that 5 years of it.
let's look at the computers available. So Mac Pro 2019, so that's 6 years ago.
Mhm,
Mac Mini 2018, which is now
mhm.
ruled obsolete. So next year the Mac Pro will be ruled vintage. I'm sorry, that's kind of crazy. The Intel Mac Pro will be
Well,
vintage.
to be clear, it's not as rigid as that. It is 5 years after it was last on sale, it becomes vintage. 7 years after it was last on sale, it becomes obsolete. But some of these Macs stay on sale for a lot longer. So, in fact, the Mac Pro
Yeah.
went on for quite a long time, past 2019. So it's coming, but it's maybe not next year. I'm not sure when
We
now.
also have the iMac Pro 2017.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
The iMac 4K and iMac 5K, remember those? 2019 and 2020 models. Yeah.
Vaguely.
So those two are still
Wow.
available in macOS. So maybe not the iMac 5K, which came out in 2020. So maybe we'll still have one more year of Intel Macs. There's also the MacBook Air Retina 13-inch 2020, which came out in the spring, just months before the M1. Do you remember that one? A- And then,
Yes.
and then of course we have some MacBook Pros 2018, 2019, and this is curious to me. Maybe one more year because we do have a couple of odd Intel 2020 models, but we are getting to that point where macOS could soon just ditch Intel entirely.
Yeah. And it already has. I mean, there are lots of features in macOS that only work in Apple
Right.
Silicon, and of course, the moment I think of that, I can't remember them. But you don't get the full flavor on Intel Macs, and because you can't, so not unreasonably
Well,
so.
the more important
Yeah.
question I think is when will the first M1 be ditched from macOS? How long will that take? Because
Goodness, yes.
it's not Apple doesn't have like a hourglass that just tips over and then when it's empty it just stops supporting it. It's mostly about base compatibility, and we know because the M1 was such a breakthrough that this chip could be supported for as much as 10 years easily before they move on.
Yeah.
Because it just comes down to it's not about even the operating system. It's about the developers. And when you put support for equipment in the operating system, you're more or less winking and nodding at the developers saying you need to support at least the power of this device when you're making an app for this. It's kind of the handshake you're doing at that point. So I can see Apple keeping the M1 around so much longer because theoretically, for most apps, the M1 will be sufficient for a long time. Right. I mean, the base
Yeah.
i3 Intel chip that you could get in some MacBook Airs would have like a 5-year lifespan. 5 years after the i3 came out, that thing I don't even know if the Mac could turn on anymore. So the M1, I have a feeling is going to outlast the operating systems. Like Apple will go bankrupt before this thing stops working. At this point, I'm exaggerating, but it is a very powerful chipset. So I'm interested in seeing what that timeline looks like.
I watched the launch. Actually, I realised I watched the launch of both the 2018 Intel Mac Mini and the redesigned MacBook Air at the time. I was just my wife Angela uses a MacBook Air. She's moved to I can't think M3, I think it is, and I took back her old one, which it was the 2018 one, and I've been considering kind of repurposing it as a writing device somewhere. But when they were launched, the Mac Mini, I mean, this was back in the day when we had Apple events, and every sneeze is applauded by someone in the audience. But this time, Tim Cook comes out and he doesn't say the Mac Mini is coming. He just starts to make a hint, and there's this murmur around the room like, we know what's coming. Is it happening? Is it real? And then it is, and there's great applause. And Apple goes crazy, really, with this launch of it, because they show a video that's basically Close Encounters of the Third Kind with a Mac Mini coming down to Earth and landing on someone's desk. It's just really, really, really overproduced. And the part of the excitement for the audience was that at that time we had wondered seriously if Apple was never going to update the Mac Mini. There'd been a version 4 years before that wasn't well received, and a couple of years before that, before the last kind of popular one. All the stuff was going on. So you understood the interest and the attention. And then out comes an Apple spokesperson and we've had Tim Cook hyping it up for the audience on the practically on the edge of the seats. We've had the Close Encounters motion picture, and he comes in, this guy, Tom Brogan, I think it is, Tom Brogan, and starts off with the colour. And it just, there's a sudden collapse into it. Really? Is that it? But then, he does get onto performance, and he got cheers for the fact that it's 5 times faster than the predecessor. I wish I knew now how much faster the M1 was, because they were working on it in 2018. So coming out there enthusing, knowing that such a revolution was coming and would do it, strange days. But apart from my repurposed MacBook Air Intel one, I am fully on Apple Silicon. So am I just completely unfair to think, yeah, fine, let Intel go?
No, and the Intel users that are still hanging on to it, it's got to be for enterprise reasons. It's got to be for emulator reasons. I know it's one of the ATP guys, I think, John Siracusa, who still has a 2019 Mac Pro with Intel that can run an external GPU so he can play Destiny on it, right? It's such a specific use case, but it's like people are still fiddling with these computers, but also I feel like the people who are hanging on to Intels, it's not just about money, right? They're just literally holding on to them because they want the Intel chipset. Even when Apple stops giving it the most modern operating system, it's still going to get plenty of security patches for years to come. Apple still updates Monterey. So, Intel's got a long curve at the end of its life. And even then, the people who know what they're doing will just boot different things, run their own security checks, and maybe just end up with Linux eventually. The people who don't know what they're doing that still have Intel, that's who Apple's talking to with a lot of this stuff that's coming out. That's who they're talking to with the $999 M4 MacBook Air. They're saying, hey, it's time. Get the new thing. Get away from Intel. You don't need it anymore. And I think more and more people are listening. And every anecdote I hear about someone going from Intel to M series anything, M1, M2, M4, it's I can't believe I waited this long. It's a completely different machine. I didn't even know they could go this fast. It's incredible. So, yeah, anyone hanging on out there, just go ahead, update. It's fine.
I remember thinking, even the M1 was so fast, how in the world did I put up with a Mac being that incredibly slow before? I never seemed it until you saw this. But I have this 58 Keys YouTube channel for writers, and quite often, if new hardware comes up on it, there will be comments from people saying, well, writers don't need the latest and greatest. They can get on by fine with these things. And you get into the conversation with people about this because, of course, they're right, but it doesn't mean we can't have nice things. And it tends to be, not always, but tends to be people who, it's what you said about they don't know. And it's not about security, not about updates. They're not following Apple. They don't care about this stuff. But they're perfectly happy with their machine, so they have no reason to see that an Apple Silicon one would be better. So I think it's a hard sell, but you're right that is Apple is aiming at them.
Okay, yeah. So tangent, but related. I played Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim. I think it came out in 2012, 2011 on the PlayStation 3, right? I played it to death. Hundreds of hours, did everything you could in that game. Lovely game. Every loading screen you could count in minutes, right? It was just a slow to load game. Half of the game time, if you played for 300 hours, 100 hours was loading screens. It was just how, but that was fast back then, right? Because coming from the PlayStation 2 era of just like, all right, well, I'm going to go make lunch and come back and my game will be ready to play, kind of stuff. Well, jump ahead, and the Elder Scrolls comes out again, of course, on the PlayStation 5, and they've remastered it, and it's 2 generations later. It also came out on PS4, but it was still staggeringly slow loading screens, faster, but still slow. And then they did a thing with the PlayStation 5 just because they could, because it was so well done with their memory and everything. Instant load. It changed the game, literally. And it made me interested in playing it again. So many years later, more than a decade later, I'm like, I'm going to play Elder Scrolls again. Yes, they remastered it. It looks better, whatever. But what sold me was the instant loading. And I'm getting to a point. there was no longer a loading screen. You just did everything, and you could actually just play the game and enjoy it. Now, going back to Macs, imagine you're a writer, and you're like, yeah, I don't need anything better than this 2015 MacBook Air. And then you turn it on, and you're waiting to get into the system, and then you're waiting to get into the app, and then you're waiting to get into Safari to do your research. And even if it's seconds, I know they weren't the slowest machines in the world, but we're still counting in seconds, sometimes minutes, depending on what you're doing. That is time that you could otherwise be doing the actual work. And that is no longer something you wait on M series and up. Any M1 and up, it's all instantaneous. It all just happens. And now it no longer becomes about what am I waiting on? It's what am I writing? So there is a bit of truth to, yes, writers don't need the latest and greatest, but at the same time, if you can spend more time writing and less time waiting on things to happen, it's a better productivity tool.
This is going to sound silly, but I promise you this is true. When the M1 first came out, I was moving from my 2018 Mac Mini to an M1 Mac Mini, and I did a screen recording on both of them. I typed out the first page of Pride and Prejudice, and then I ran the two videos side by side, and the M1 was faster getting to the end. The typing was quicker, which is unbelievable, I think, but still true.
Imagine you have a very robust notes app, and you have hundreds of notes, thousands of notes, and they're all linked together, and some of them are pages long, and you want to go in there to add to your notes. Well, now you're having to wait on your computer to recompute those notes every single time, versus instant load from memory, which is a feature of the M series chip because of its bandwidth, right, that Intel couldn't do. You're just jumping right into that notes. And you'd have to triple the size of your notes before it started getting a spinning icon, right? And in case you didn't catch, I didn't actually say my point of that video game anecdote. In case you didn't miss it, yes, I can still play Skyrim on the PS3, but why would I when I can do everything instantly on the PS5, right? So that was kind of my point. It doesn't matter that you can do the same thing on older tech. What does it save you? What does it do for you to do it on the newer tech? And is it worth the trade-off? And I would say even if you're not a writer, if you're a music producer, if you're editing video or photos, anything that requires you turning on the computer and waiting for it to boot, it's crazy. I mean, I remember, what was it? Federighi was talking about the basically instant boot sequence of they open the lid and you're in Mac OS, and then you plug in an external monitor and it's on the screen, right? You shut the lid and it's on the screen. It's just, there was instantaneous things happening there that everyone was just like, wait a minute. You're telling me that you didn't have to wait for the monitor to appear? You're changing display settings and it doesn't have to turn the screen black before it comes back on with the new display settings? That was maddening to people. Like they were like, how are you doing this? And of course now we take it for granted. But yeah, faster loading is always a big deal, even if you're doing very, very small things that doesn't use any compute power.
This episode is brought to you by Fast Growing Trees. Did you know Fast Growing Trees is the biggest online nursery in the US with thousands of different plants and over 2 million happy customers? They have all the plants your yard needs, like fruit trees, privacy trees, flowering trees, shrubs, and so much more. Whatever plants you're interested in, Fast Growing Trees has you covered. Find the perfect fit for your climate and space. So they have thousands of plants, and actually this week I'm kind of down one. This tiny tree we used to have, it was in a pot when we moved here. 20 years later, it became this towering and unfortunately dangerous tree. It's damaged in the winds. Recently, it had already taken out fencing left and right. Our actual house was now in risk, so it had to go, which was deeply sad. Well, actually, it was also deeply impressive seeing this giant tree taken down. But it was such a heavy tree that even though it was being chopped up in little bits, we now have a couple of holes in the ground where parts of the trunk kind of fell end first into the grass. And this is the thing that most surprised me. The shape of our garden seems different now. I mean, I used to think that I would see it as this long, narrow line, but now without this big tree, it somehow seems more square and also, well, maybe unsurprisingly, more empty. So much so that if I were in the States, I would be going to Fast Growing Trees to look through their catalogue of thousands of plants. Possibly not for trees this time, but definitely for plants. As I'm not in the US, I'm going to Fast Growing Trees to at least look through their catalogue, get some ideas, and read what they say. This is most useful. Read what they say about which plants work best in which climates. While I have to just browse, though, you can buy. And this spring, they have the best deals for your yard, up to half off on select plants and other deals. And listeners to our show get 15% off their first purchase when using the code AppleInsider at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code AppleInsider at checkout. So, fastgrowingtrees.com, code AppleInsider. Now is the perfect time to plant. Use AppleInsider to save today. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. And thanks to Fast Growing Trees for supporting the Apple Insider podcast. I have a problem talking about specifications and speeds because they don't really. I mean, it's not like I don't understand them, and I see when one number is different to another. I can get that, but I don't feel it. But you were saying there about getting on with things. I have a Mac Studio now, which I am adoring. In the last couple of weeks, I produced a couple of magazines in Affinity Publisher, and actually, as we record this morning, I was working on something else, and a problem came up. I was asked to change something small but significant in one of the issues, and before I'd read the end of the email, Affinity was loaded. There was a magazine made to change. It was probably under a minute from what is the problem, fixed, sent back a new version. And I know part of that is the speed of the Mac Studio, but it was also, my mind was still on the problem. My mind didn't have to stop to think, where is the app loading? I didn't get distracted by something else while it was loading. It's just think it, do it, gone. And I find that blissful, actually, when you're in the middle of working things. So I was very glad to move to Apple Silicon. I'm now, after a bit of buyer's remorse at the start, absolutely incredibly glad that I have a lovely Mac Studio. And in fact, I might even pat it while we're talking. But I could go on about the Mac all day, and you could try, but less successfully, because you just bung your Mac over in the corner and leave it on a shelf. And someday I'm going to have to come over to your place and sort that out. But you do it because you are an iPad man. And actually, this week, there has been news, or at least strong rumours, about these things blowing together. So, iPadOS 19, what are the latest rumours, and do you believe them?
Well, this is the issue with language. We don't have the right words to describe things, so we rely on things that we already have to make a comparison. People are calling iPadOS 19 more Mac-like. What does that mean, right? It's not that it's running macOS. It just means that they changed the productivity systems in it. That's all they're saying. Because, right, the people, especially the people giving the rumor, likely believe that the macOS operating system has a superior multitasking system. So they say any improvement to iPadOS is basically making it more Mac-like. So keep that in mind. But my read of this is we're probably going to see some changes to Stage Manager, how windows work. There's been an issue, right? Stage Manager was a good idea, poorly executed, because size classes basically made it so apps could only be certain sized windows, and you never knew what class of app you were going to get when you resize the window. Because basically, if you're on a 13-inch iPad Pro and you do a 50-50 split between two windows, the window's going to believe it's in a vertical 11-inch iPad. And then if you make it even smaller, it's now an iPad mini or an iPhone, right? And those size classes matter because certain apps display information in different ways. You're going to lose your sidebar at a certain size class. You're going to go to mobile Safari at a certain size class. So because of how these things move around, buttons and items just jump around randomly while you're resizing a window, and that can be catastrophic for a user. I'm in Safari at about 80% display, and I right-click drafts to bring it into the last 20%. That's not ever what happens. What happens is drafts opens at like 30%, and Safari shrinks to 60%, and then I have to rearrange the windows to how I actually want them every single time. So there is an issue with Stage Manager as it exists, and there's a lot of room for improvement. I don't think that necessarily means that the improvement is, let's just make it macOS. I just think what this rumor means is we're going to see some refinements where we didn't see any last year. There was nothing done on iPadOS last year. We got a new app and everything done to iOS was done to iPadOS. But as far as specific features for the platform, nothing. So yes, this is how it goes. Every 2 years, Apple does something to iPadOS and it's multitasking, and it's going to happen again.
Well, I'm looking forward to WWDC for all sorts of reasons, but one of them is iPadOS because of this. I was going to say biannual cycle. Is that twice a year or every 2 years? Every 2 years cycle, anyway, whatever that one's called. But then I asked you whether you believed it in part because we get so many rumours about the iPad is coming in the Mac is becoming like the iPad, and everything's becoming like the Apple Vision Pro and things. You still don't see a single universal interface coming to everything Apple.
That's silly. They're different products. They need different UIs. They have different interaction standpoints. Mac doesn't have Apple Pencil or Touch. iPhone doesn't have Apple Pencil. There's reasons why these interfaces are different. iPhones are smaller. They're also that it's not 16:9, but it's like 1:18:3 or some nonsense. Yeah, they're all just different things. They need different operating systems. They all have a very similar base. I mean, if you go all the way back to Mac OS or OS X, and then the introduction of the iPhone, it was OS X on a mobile device. Wow. And we're calling it iOS. Wow. Great. And then it was just iOS. And then iPadOS was just iOS built for tablets and eventually got its own moniker, but it's still essentially just iOS with some add-ons. WatchOS, tvOS, they're all just branches of iOS, which is a branch of macOS. So if you look deep enough, they are essentially the same. No matter how much you tweak and change how they look and how they feel, they can't be the same operating system fundamentally. So that is just a silly concept in the first place. Windows tried to do it. It was a bad idea. It does not scale. But the idea that Vision OS could influence the design across the operating systems, yes. We've seen some silly, by the way, silly concepts where the camera just stays on all the time and becomes your background of your phone, which is maddening because your battery would die in 8 minutes. Not going to happen. That's not the point of making it more Vision OS-like. What Apple's goal is, allegedly, is to basically just give a more similar design system across the platforms, and Vision OS is what it sees as the future. So it's going to align everything with its future goals and design. That's all that's happening. They're not turning iOS into Vision OS. They're not turning Mac OS into iOS. None of that's happening. And this rumor about iPadOS 19 getting quote-unquote more Mac-like is just, it's like the Bible trying to write Revelations and explain what nuclear warheads are. They don't have the words for it. We're Nostradamus trying to predict the future where we don't have any of the ways of explaining it. So we're comparing it to things we know. Yes, iPadOS might get more complex multitasking and window interactions. Does that mean it's Mac-like? We don't know until we see it.
This episode is brought to you by Rogue Amoeba. Makers of the best audio tools for the Mac, but actually they might as well be the only makers of these, because I wouldn't now consider anyone else, and actually I haven't done for 20 years or more, from like daft little things like this one time I needed to record a Mac's email bleep to cover up a guest's cursing. More recently, when I record my own appearances on BBC Radio, streaming live and recording as I talk, it is always, and without exception, Rogue Amoeba's Audio Hijack that I turn to. Audio Hijack is so good, so powerful, and actually, yes, also so very easy to use that it's the obvious app to turn to. Plus, it now supports shortcuts, which I need to get into more, because you can use it so that you can start and stop a recording with a click of an on-screen button anyway, or actually, I might use this as the press of a Stream Deck button. Shortcut support, I should say, is also in Rogue Amoeba's Sound Source. Now, I promise I won't go through every one of the company's audio apps, because we can talk about that later. But Sound Source, well, that's the audio feature that the Mac ought to have had built in and doesn't. Just for one example, okay, Sound Source, it can get my Mac to play music in my AirPods, but route notification bleeps to the speaker in my Mac Studio. So I don't jump at the sound of a bleep in the middle of a Regina Spektor song. How about this? Let me just say this. Free, fully featured trials of all of Rogue Amoeba's apps are available before purchase. And when you do buy, there isn't a subscription pricing, it's just a one-time charge. Plus, through the end of May, you can save 20% off any purchase by using the coupon code INSIDER. Visit macaudio.com/insider to learn more about Rogue Amoeba's apps and take advantage of this offer. And thanks to Rogue Amoeba for, well, actually all that Audio Hijack in particular has done for me over the years, and for supporting the Apple Insider podcast. I have actually used macOS on an iPad because I used to quite often remote control into my Office Mac from wherever I was. And it worked fine enough, but it, clunky in that case. And actually, that's the thought. I was shocked how much on my Mac I'm using iPhone mirroring for it and things. And that still feels like a gimmick, really, even though I'm using it for real purposes. So I can see the cross-fertilization of it. But you actually may have changed my mind there. It's one of the reasons I was suspicious, let's say, of everything becoming Apple Vision Pro-like is Apple Vision Pro is the smallest seller of all of Apple's platforms. I mean, AirPods sell more than it. But you're right that it is the latest one. So it is their greatest and latest thinking. That now makes sense that it could at least inspire things in the future.
It's their plans for the future paradigm of interaction. I mean, I don't have a good metaphor. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like, what if someone tried to design one cup and that was it? You got to go to the store and you could no longer have different glasses and mugs and wine glasses, and someone designed the one single glass to rule them all, and that was the only one you were allowed to use, no matter if you were drinking beer, wine, milk, water, or anything. You only had the one glass. It would do it. It would hold the liquid and you drink out of it, but it would not contribute to certain things. Wine needs certain glasses to air out properly. Whiskey tastes better in certain glasses because of how you can use the mixings and stuff to better distribute it and, again, aerate it. Like smoking whiskeys is important for some things. Like, you can drink everything out of the same glass, but you don't get the same experience. It's just kind of a muddled version of everything. That's why we have so many glasses. So there's my silly, poorly formed metaphor, but I just don't see it happening. We don't need one operating system, no Apple OS. There won't be an Apple OS until there is no more devices, which won't happen in our lifetime. Like, this is where we're getting to. If Vision OS is a vision of the future, which I think is somewhat where the name comes from, it's an idea that we're eventually going to be away from physical displays and have everything mounted in front of us. And it seems that Tim Cook believes that, because he's the one allegedly saying that this is the only thing I care about. He's apparently refusing to see anything that is not the Apple Glass or Apple Glasses, smart glasses prototypes. Right, as far as product development goes. He's like, you guys know what an iPhone is. You know what an iPad is. Go develop those things. I don't need to see those. Bring me your headset models. Let me see those, the progress in that department. And that seems to be where he's stuck.
We have had that story that every day he uses every Apple product. And you've got to think, no, come on. 3 different versions of AirPods? I don't think so. But I did not know that one about... Well, give the man credit for focus, I suppose, but...
It's an interesting.
Not sure what I think about that.
It's an interesting story because it gets back. It ties together well with the iPadOS 19 and what we were discussing. Because why is Apple moving everything to look like Vision OS? It's simply because that is where we're going. Apple sees this as the future. Now, right now, it's a VR headset, and it will eventually be technology that would be used in making an AR headset of some sort that displays information. Are we going to get there anytime soon? Nobody knows, right? Maybe 2030. I still remember Ming-Chi Kuo saying contacts by 2030, which is very funny to me. I think he said that in 2021, I believe, somewhere in there. He said contacts by 2030. We're making progress.
Well, there's a way to go. Don't rule him out. Yeah, could be right. Doesn't seem likely. There is one thing that does seem likely, though, which actually I think ties all of this together, because the iPad, the Mac, AirPods, even everything, is going to have Apple Intelligence. And a couple of things happened this week. One of them is it's been noticed that Apple has radically changed how it, not advertises, but describes Apple Intelligence across all of its products. For the longest time now, it's been Hello Apple Intelligence. And now, I can't remember the phrasing, but it's basically like built for Apple Intelligence. That seemed to me a bit obvious, really. How long can you keep saying hello to something, even if we haven't got it all yet? I mean, we're months into this now, or months into bits of it. So I wasn't concerned about the name change, but I am, concerned's the wrong word, I am interested in things you were writing about this week to do with Apple Intelligence training. What was that about, please?
Well, so Apple is going to allow users to opt in to helping train its Apple Intelligence. Now, I can hear you all yelling. This isn't what you think it is. It's actually kind of interesting because what they're doing is they're still not using your data technically to train Apple Intelligence. Your queries to Apple Intelligence and ChatGPT are not going to Apple servers. Your photos, your conversations, none of that is like being analyzed and dragged like, ChatGPT would. What's happening is if you have analytics turned on your device, which is an optional feature to allow Apple to receive random analytics from your device, which again, don't include any personal information. Apple can now basically put in a small toolkit that allows it to make comparisons to your data sets. So what would happen is Apple wants to learn what the most common Genmoji requests are. So it makes them up. Right. It thinks, okay, well, I'm a human being. I would ask for a T-Rex in a cowboy hat. So I'm going to make a fake query suggesting that T-Rex in a cowboy hat is something someone would ask Genmoji. And then they're going to make 50 of these fake requests types, put them in a bundle that's, a couple kilobits, nothing, and insert it to your phone. Then when you make a Genmoji request, make several, it's going to turn those bits of data into basically analyzable clumps. They won't actually get to see what your queries are. What they're doing is pattern matching. So they're going to look for the pattern in dinosaur and a cowboy hat and look and see how often that repeats across multiple devices, across multiple users. And once a pattern emerges for that data cluster of, let's say, 100 more users, Apple can determine that hundreds of users are asking for dinosaur in a cowboy hat, and then they can go in and better train Genmoji to make that emoji look less distorted, right? And it's all done without actually taking data off your device. All it gets is the polling data, yes or no. Did this person ask this query? How much of a percentage match is it? And then that's it. If you ask a very specific thing, turn my Aunt Stacy into a clown. Well, it's never going to get that because no one's going to be asking that, right? Only you would ask that. And if Apple got that, that would be personable, technically information. They would know you have an Aunt Stacy and could theoretically use that to find who you are. So that would actually never make it back to Apple because the polling data wouldn't be looking for it, right? So it's all obfuscated. It's using a system called differential privacy. We've heard of this before all the way back to 2016. And Apple's actually been using differential privacy since as early as 2006. They just didn't start talking about it till 2016. So it's interesting to see this technology rear its head again. And it's for Apple Intelligence training. And it gets more complicated for different data sets. But what do you think so far?
This all sounds good, but you mentioned clowns there as an example. In the last week, please don't ask why, I had occasion to ask Image Playground to do me an image of 3 clowns holding a horse. And it gave me an image of 1 clown and 2 horses. And it's like, I failed to see how it could be that simplistically wrong. But, they were very good horses. Give it that, I suppose. I found an alternative answer to what I needed this strange thing for. So any improvement, and this, the way you describe it reminds me of so many things that Apple does with security. I'm thinking of it. Oh yeah, it's the Touch ID thing on the Apple Extended Keyboard,
right.
when you're buying something, what you're buying doesn't get your fingerprint. It gets the answer, yes, it's the fingerprint, or no, it isn't.
Yes.
And that's it. The secure enclave, it at least used to be called, and that seems to work.
No, there's still secure enclave. Um, yeah, so this system's actually very basic for things like Genmoji, and it's going to come to Image Playground, Image Wand, memory creation, and writing tools, because all of those are short phrase type interactions. But Apple also wants to train Apple Intelligence on larger data sets, like an email, or other communications and other larger text fields. And in order to do that, again, they're not going to soak up your email. They're going to create basically what are called, I want to find the actual word for it, but they're going to make fake emails, synthetic data. There we go. So they're going to use synthetic emails basically that they've written, like, for example, hey, meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m., can you make it? Right. And then just create that fake email and then create dozens of other ones. And then they're going to basically transform them into scannable data sets, send them to your phone, and do the same thing. And now it's not for every email on your device. They're going to randomly select some emails, and then they're going to transform those into data sets again so they don't see the actual contents of the email. And then they're going to compare how closely related they are. And they'll see, basically fragment matching between these emails, seeing how people talk and analyze what is more human and try to basically get their artificial emails to sound more human over time. And then when you go to email and see a summary, it will understand context and what's supposed to be in the summary and how humans talk to each other better based on this information. Again, without ever removing an email, a photo, or any information from your device. The end result is still just a poll with percentage completion, stuff like that. It's interesting.
It is interesting. And it doesn't sound controversial, although it's one of those things where you can see that initially it sounds like it will be.
People are going to hate it.
But but funny I should say that, because this is the time of the show. This is your idea, Wes, that things that are controversial be confined to the next chapter. So if anyone would like to just escape from all the things going on in the world with politics that are actually affecting Apple, you can skip to the next chapter, which will be a happy song, I promise, or something like that. Because, Wes, this is another week where there are controversial things going on. Break it to me gently. I'm going to guess tariffs are in there somewhere, but otherwise, what's been happening?
Well, it's almost nothing worth discussing because it's going to be different by the time you hear this anyway. As we've learned, it's all just nonsense. Zero planning, zero thought. But after initiating tariffs, escalating tariffs, removing them, renouncing them, changing them back, and then now we're at 45% China tariffs. There was a scare where someone accidentally put 245% in a official White House document, and everyone freaked out for about 8 minutes until we found out that they...
Oh, actually, sorry. Yeah, I've got to stop you there. It wasn't an accident. It was misinterpreted. People thought that was an escalation, and actually it's just somebody adding up all of the previous
It was poorly
things.
executed.
Doesn't affect Apple. Yeah. I mean, I remember being relieved when I saw it doesn't affect Apple. Well, that was a bit rich of me because it affects certain US companies with certain imports having to pay 2.5 times the cost of whatever they're doing. So it's not trivial, but it wasn't the mountain that it appeared at first. No,
but in the back and forth, basically where we've landed since last week is 10% tariffs on everyone else for 90 days still in effect. 145% tariffs on China still in effect. Trump is considering trying to find ways to escalate because China has escalated, and what they've done is they stopped raising tariffs because they think they called it childish. Which I think we did cover last week, but they did, instead of raising tariffs, now they're regulating the export of rare earth metals, and you have to apply as a company for the ability to export that, and you can be approved or rejected. And so American companies and other companies around the world will now have to ask the Chinese government if they're allowed to export things like magnets, right? And Apple uses a lot of magnets, for example. And that's just one of many metals. Of course, there's a lot of rare metals that go into semiconductors. And it's just basically a way to tighten control over a very important system. If everyone will remember, it got very difficult to make and ship new cars during COVID because China couldn't make enough. Basically, the supply chain had broken so that rare earth metals weren't getting distributed to semiconductor plants to make chips that go into vehicles. So it got very broken very quickly, and this is a very significant threat. And as far as I'm aware, Donald Trump hasn't responded to this, so we'll see what happens. But that could very much affect Apple. We have no idea how or when. This is all technically new, even though it's 2 days old now, I think. We'll just have to wait and see. But as far as Trump's side of things, because China's its own thing, we'll just have to still wait and see what happens there. They could really mess with Apple on this one. But as far as American side goes, the exemptions that Trump promised last week, again, I said, we recorded on Thursday. Well, this came out after we recorded that Trump was going to give Apple exemptions on its tariffs. Problem is, those tariffs are exemptions are now temporary, whatever that means, and that they're going to come up with specific semiconductor exemption or tariffs starting very soon, which basically comes back to Apple having to charge more for everything anyway if they're not exempted from those. So it's all up in the air. Nobody knows what's going on, and we'll have something new to say next week.
Nobody knows, but we do have the odd clue. What you just said then about semiconductors, officially, the White House word is that there is an investigation into the national security impact of semiconductors, and that depending on the results of that, there may be tariffs. But at the exact same time, the Commerce Secretary has already said there will be tariffs. So the whole investigation has been prejudged.
Yeah.
We got to wait to see what the amount is.
Well, the tariffs were announced on quote unquote Liberation Day. Was it April 4th?
Yeah.
And then the tariffs changed 6 times since then. And then the exemptions were announced, and then the exemptions were revoked. And then the semiconductor study, investigation was announced. And in that document, I think it was funny, they had placeholders for dates, and they backdated it to April 1st, which was before the tariffs were even announced. Yeah. So it clearly was not planned from the start. What was it? Insert date 21 days from announcement or something was in the document, which is now May 5th or something. But anyway, just very funny to me. It's crazy back and forth. I personally believe we're going to come out of this okay. It's all bluff. It's a big giant bluff. No one knows what they're doing, and when they're called on it, they'll back off. It's happened before. It'll happen again, and maybe we won't have to pay $8,000 for an iPhone this fall.
Unless it's the iPhone Fold or processor prices go up separately, but that's a different thing and doesn't belong in Controversy Corner, which means actually we can end it. Chapter point here. And now, a song. Or actually, especially because I've got you, Apple Vision Pro, there is news about the next version of this. I mean, there's always rumours about the next one, but in this case, there's more materials news. Titanium versus, I'm going to say aluminium. You might say it differently. Do you know what the details of this, and does it excite you?
Well, aluminum. So Apple Vision Pro, I think we have a model that William will buy day one because it might come in blue.
I should explain, I actually did the illustration for that, and part of the rumour, the rumour started saying that it would be black, but then as it went through, it should be more like a kind of graphite dark blue. Yeah, so I dummied up a blue version of it, and I've got to say, I did think it looked quite good. I was quite tempted by that. Yes, it's important. Colour.
This rumor around titanium, using titanium to lighten the Vision Pro, it is confusing. William did a good job explaining it. Mike was beating him with a stick in the background, trying to make sure he got it right. But basics of basics, Vision Pro right now is a big, heavy, dense headset, mostly because aluminum is lightweight, yes, but it's also not very durable. So they likely had to use more of it in certain places to ensure that it wouldn't shatter the minute you touched it, right? Titanium is a much tougher metal. So theoretically, Apple will be able to replace aluminum parts with titanium parts and alloys across the system using less mass overall of metal and having the same, if not more, durability because of titanium. Yes, titanium does weigh more, but you'd be using less throughout the system, effectively balancing it out, giving it more air, more room to breathe, more cooling capabilities, and maybe even thinning it out a little bit because, again, you're not using as much thickness in certain areas. It kind of makes sense. It sounds more expensive. This is the Vision Pro 2 we're talking about, not the lightweight, cheaper model that we've discussed. So I don't know. We'll know when we see it, I guess.
Okay, we talked a lot today about things that are happening, that are going on, and things that are changing. But one consistent thing is Earth Day, and Apple has made plenty of announcements about Earth Day this week, as it does every year. Is there a highlight for you in Apple's environmental efforts that they've said this week?
Two things. They're giving a very lame discount for anyone who wants to recycle something. You can bring in a set of your old AirPods and get 10% off. Great. So maybe if you were holding off on that $42,000 Mac Pro, this would be a good time to do it. 10% is a pretty good deal versus you could save like $20 off of most purchases. So cool, I guess. But more importantly, I thought you might find this interesting, William, is Apple has announced that they've made 60% of cuts in its global emissions since it announced its 2030 plan.
Okay, that sounds like a lot. I'm trying to remember when this talking about being carbon neutral by 2030. Is that they're 60% of the way there, or is this?
So they announced it in 2020. So we're 5 years in, which means theoretically they'd be halfway there ish. And what Apple is saying is they're ahead of schedule. They're at 60% cuts now. Just like a lot of things, that second half is probably the harder half to figure out.
Right.
But they're working on it. They're working on making their entire supply chain run on green energy. They're working on all these partnerships. I think they're doing what people consider cheating, which is using carbon credits, and they're also evaluating ways to balance out, right, like electricity use or something. They turned on all the demo units in the Apple Store now have the only charge on clean energy setting, right? So they're finding ways to cut every tiny little percentage, and 60% is quite good. I hope they reach carbon neutral by 2030, right? That's their goal. Now, carbon neutral is, again, people take issue with that phrase because a lot of companies use it as we only put out 30,000 tons of CO2 and then we buy, enough trees to offset that every year, right? That's how usually companies try to claim they're carbon neutral. They're still polluting the atmosphere to death, and they're just offsetting it by buying trees. So far, Apple seems to not be going that route because traditionally carbon neutral is kind of a controversy amongst environmentalists because companies have figured out a way to kind of fake their way to glory. Apple, on the other hand, is actually taking the steps to make its iPhone boxes smaller, so they're having to ship less. They're shipping them over sea rather than air. They're they're incentivizing companies to use green energy, and all of their offices run off of 100% renewable energy. So stuff like that is real. That is a real impact. And on top of all of those real things, they are also buying forests. Now, they're not buying trees, which is a little bit silly, has been proven to not be quite realistic. Apple is actually buying and preserving forests, which is different. So it feels like what they're doing is actually real. And maybe they'll reach 2030. Maybe they'll hit a stalling point somewhere around 2028 and start to panic. I don't know. But I'm happy to see that they're trying.
It is impressive, actually, that they're doing all this. They've been accused of greenwashing. That's the phrase I was trying to think of. But on the whole, it does seem like they mean it. And Lisa Jackson, head of environment, seems... she's won awards for this kind of thing. She's a good person to be leading it all. This is the point of the show where ordinarily I would ask you about how people can get in touch with each of us. But one of the ways is actually through Apple Podcast reviews. And I understand you've got at least a couple there. Are they on the good side, bad side? Because if they're bad, we've run out of time. And
No, we've been getting some really good reviews lately, and I appreciate everyone writing in. I also got an email I wanted to point out. So a couple of comments on audio levels and audio quality. Neither of us are professional editors. William handles editing the show. We've tried different techniques, different things.
No, you're just being nice now. I am getting it wrong each time. Although, as I speak to you, my attempts to use compressors and a couple of different microphones are being thwarted by my cold. So, working on it, though. But it is me, not Wes. Wes, you are crystal clear. So let's be sure.
But it's still trying to make sure that we give you guys the best show, because audio level changes between hosts. We're not recording in the same room, obviously. William is across the ocean from me. It's tough. It's something that was solved previously, so I understand the frustration of having these things come back. But I appreciate you guys' patience. Hopefully, I've listened back to the show, I can hear that there's a difference, but I personally haven't found it to be overly frustrating. I'm sure for some audio people, they find it a bit overwhelming, or maybe in a vehicle it's a bit more pronounced. But it's something William's working on. I think he's recording on 2 microphones right now to try and figure out which one sounds better. But
yes.
In any case, I do thank you for the feedback, because it does keep us on our toes, and we are working on it. But here are 5 reviews this week, all pretty excellent. First is CDev0. Breaking news. News podcast talks about news, and the news contains politics. This is truly groundbreaking discovery and should be taken very seriously. Love the sarcasm, 5 stars. Thank you for the excellent review. Yes, as we've said, we talk about politics. It is now in the controversy corner to try and contain it a little bit. At least we only talk about politics when it pertains to Apple, of course. Oh, I ran into my microphone. The next review, 5 stars from mhopman31. Without a doubt, the best podcast, ... Apple truncates these. I don't know why. I have been a listener of this podcast for years, going back to the early days of Mike Campbell and others. It's without a doubt the best podcast. I can't read today. Without a doubt, the best podcast when it comes to Apple rumors and future product announcements. Keep it up, guys. Thank you for that excellent review.
Thank you.
Very good review there. Appreciate it. And longtime listener. I mentioned it on the show before, but I have also listened since the days of Mikey Campbell. So good to know that you guys have stuck around so long. Let's see. We do have a 3-star review. So the listener apparently enjoys our content, but they're unhappy about the politics. They say, needs to be more Apple, less on politics. Former subscriber, back when it was Apple Insider and not Politics Insider. I don't know the context of this one. Are they still not a subscriber and they've come back to leave the review? I'm not entirely sure, but if you haven't listened in a while and you're not actively listening now, and maybe you're not even hearing me speak right now, go check it out. Controversy Corner in its own chapter. You can skip it. Anonymous Anonymous Mauler. Sure. You know who you are. Great job. 5 stars. Informative and always good banter. Politics are part of the world. I don't get the issue with it. Thank you for that. And finally, last review here. 4 stars. They love the show. Crazy Soda 23. I've been listening to Apple Insider podcast for about 10 years. Even though the hosts changed, the world situation has changed. I still think the information they present is very relative, I guess. Then they comment on the audio issues and William's microphone, which again we've addressed. Working on it, and thank you again for the kind review. And we will keep working to make sure that this is the best podcast it can be. And we're happy to have you guys as listeners.
I said right before you said this is actually one great way to get in touch with us. But if someone specifically wants to talk to you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Well, I've gotten some good emails this week. You can always email me, Wes@appleinsider.com. You can also message me on Blue Sky. I've had an uptick of followers recently. I don't know where that's coming from. Maybe this show, who knows? But feel free to follow and say hi. You can always tag me in something or send a private message. My messages are open. So if you want to comment on the show or something Apple related, feel free to reach out. Any of those methods are fine. And of course, I still have a Mastodon account. It does exist, and I will see a notification if you try to get a hold of me there.
Cool. In my case, I'm not doing enough on social media. I just seem to have been caught up with lots of different projects, but I intend to be around Blue Sky more, and you can always find me on YouTube on 58 Keys, or email me directly, william@appleinsider.com, because that is my absolute favourite. You and me having a chatter over emails. Now, if you are an Apple Insider Plus subscriber already, well, please don't go anywhere, because we have things to talk about. But if you're not yet a subscriber, well, of course you can be, but in the meantime, thank you for listening. Thanks as well to our sponsors, Fast Growing Trees and Rogue Amoeba. And Wes and I will see you next week.
Yep. Talk then.